Welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving into a captivating story of redemption, love, and new beginnings. Meet Ethan Miller, an American surgeon who flees to the emerald shores of Ireland to escape the heartbreak of a failed marriage. In the small town of Ballymore, he unexpectedly becomes a local hero and finds himself at a crossroads between his past and a promising future. As Ethan navigates the trials of his new life, he discovers that sometimes the path to healing and happiness lies in the most unexpected places. Stay tuned as we unfold this gripping tale of transformation and second chances. The weeks leading up to that morning had been rough. My mind was a fog of heartbreak and too many pints of Guinness. I'd come to Ireland to escape, to clear my head in the rolling green hills. Instead, I wandered from town to town, lost in a haze of cheap beer and forgettable conversations. The weight of what I left behind in Rochester, my career, my wife, my life, pressed down on me. Had I made the right choice leaving it all behind? That morning changed everything. It yanked me out of my stupor and forced me to face myself and the mess I was in. The night before was a blur, just like all the others, too much to drink and memories I'd rather forget. I stumbled back to a strange room and passed out, not caring what the morning would bring. Little did I know it would begin with a jolt that would alter everything. Wake up, get up, it's an emergency. The sergeant's having a heart attack. Someone was shaking me violently. Where am I? What the hell? Quick, get up. Hands pulled me from the bed. Calm down, I'm getting up. What's the problem? You're a doctor, right? The sergeant is having a heart attack. You had to come quickly. I scrambled to my feet, realizing I was barefoot. No time to worry about that now. They rushed me down a hallway to an office. A woman in a police uniform was desperately trying to perform CPR on a large man, also in uniform. Oh, crap, I was in a police station. I knelt down, checking for a pulse, feeling for breath. Nothing. Do you have a defibrillator? I asked the policewoman. I think so. I'll get it. She raced off. I started chest compressions, the Guinness haze still clinging to me. She returned with an AED. Please be in working order, I thought. Get the pads out and turn it on. I ripped open the sergeant's shirt, placed the pads, and turned on the AED. It instructed me to stand back. I pressed the button. Zap. His body jolted, but nothing. I tried again. Zap. Still nothing. Damn it. The third time. Zap. Finally, the machine announced a normal rhythm. Thank God. I sighed, checking his weak but steady heartbeat. Did you call an ambulance? I shouted to the policewoman. She mumbled something. Do it now. I urged. She grabbed her phone as I monitored the sergeant's pulse and breathing. The fog in my head was starting to clear, and I realized I was in a police station. How did I get here? Slowly, the memories of the previous night, the pub, the endless pints of Guinness, came back. It was just past 9 a.m., and I'd sobered up remarkably fast. A few minutes later, the policewoman returned. The ambulance will be another half hour. It's coming from Dingle. My heart raced, a mix of panic and lingering alcohol. I needed the bathroom. Come over here and put your hand on his chest. I instructed the policewoman. She sat and placed her hand on the sergeant's chest. I can feel his heart. Stay here while I use the bathroom. Where is it? I asked. She pointed around the corner. I made my way to the bathroom and relieved myself. Back in the hallway, I noticed a few other officers had arrived. I approached a young one. Where the hell am I? I asked him. Garda station. Right, I may have had a bit too much to drink last night. What town is this, and how did I get here? You're in Ballymore, mate. Tommy and I brought you here after you passed out at the pub. You were having a right time before you took a tumble. He grinned. Crap, you told everyone I ran away from a shrew? I groaned. The young officer chuckled. Crap. In the distance, I heard the ambulance approaching. You're from the States, is that right? He asked. Unfortunately, yes. I grimaced. They also said you were a doctor? He sounded more curious than accusatory. Yes. I nodded. The ambulance crew rushed in, heading straight for the office where the sergeant lay. After checking his heart and breathing, I stepped back. My job was done. I watched as they loaded him onto a stretcher and wheeled him towards the ambulance, likely bound for the hospital in Dingle. I retrieved my boots and jacket from beside the bunk where I'd apparently crashed the night before. I asked a nearby policewoman if I could leave. She simply nodded. I sat down, pulled on my boots, and unrolled my jacket, checking that my wallet and phone were still in the pockets. When I returned to the main office, I noticed everyone, two standing, two sitting, staring at me in silence. It seemed any trouble I'd caused at the pub had been forgiven, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A wave of dizziness hit me. "Does anyone know where I'm staying?" I asked. All four of them looked in the same direction. A boarding house, just a few hundred yards from the station. As I walked, I took deep breaths of fresh air, trying to clear my head. I needed sleep, a hot shower, coffee, and food, in that order. I bought a large bottle of water on the way and downed it in one gulp. Reaching the guest house, I was greeted by the kind lady who ran it. "Back after a night of fun at the pub, are we? Would you like some breakfast? I've got roast potatoes ready," she offered. "Coffee would be great. I may have overdone it last night," I admitted sheepishly. "I'd heard that. When you didn't come back after the pub closed, I called the Garda. They said you'd had a drop too much and were tucked safely in one of their beds, so I went to bed myself." She chuckled. She smiled and disappeared into the kitchen. The delicious aroma of cooking food made me realize just how hungry I was. Her husband came in, a wide grin on his face. "You've had a busy day for a Sunday, haven't you?" he chuckled. "Huh?" I replied, confused. He grinned. "The station called. Told me what you did for Sergeant Murphy. You saved his life. Margaret, come here. We've got ourselves a hero staying with us." "What's this, Sean?" she asked, hurrying back in. "He saved Jerry's life. Had a heart attack in his office, and this young man brought him back. He's a doctor from America," Sean explained. I tried to downplay it. "It was nothing, really. Nothing." "Nothing, my backside," Sean insisted. "He did CPR and used that electric thingamajig to get Jerry's heart going again." They looked at me expectantly, clearly wanting all the details. All I wanted was coffee and that breakfast. "Could I get some coffee, please?" I asked. Margaret nodded and soon returned with a steaming pot and a mug. I drank nearly the whole pot, along with a massive plate of food, scrambled eggs, ham, fried tomatoes, beans, and toast. It was delicious. I had a feeling Sergeant Murphy had eaten one too many of these hearty Irish breakfasts over the years, leading to his close call. After breakfast, I headed to my room, took a long, hot shower, and lay down, determined to get my life back on track. Let me tell you a bit about myself. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 33 years old, 5 feet 11, 170 pounds, with black hair and blue eyes. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, or at least I was back in Rochester, where I finished my residency 2 years ago at University Hospital. My soon-to-be ex-wife, Melissa Carter, is an elementary school teacher. She's 32, also from Rochester, and her family still lives there. My parents retired to Florida last year, sunshine and golf, their dream. My sister, Karen, lives in Connecticut with her husband, Dave, and their 2 boys, Ryan and Ben. My parents spoil those grandkids rotten whenever they visit. So, how did I end up in Ireland? Fair question. Last night at the pub, fueled by too many pints of Guinness, I'd overshared. Big time. The entire town probably knows my story by now. Melissa? Everyone called her Mel. Well, she wasn't exactly faithful. I said things I probably shouldn't have. But Guinness has a way of loosening the tongue, turning you into an open book. I left Rochester 2 months ago when my marriage imploded. I sold or donated most of my belongings, keeping only what fit in my car. A friend, Dave Walters, had been through a similar situation and gave me some much-needed advice before I left. Seems infidelity is practically an epidemic among doctors' spouses. Mel comes from a big, boisterous family, 2 brothers, a sister. Her parents are comfortable, retired, still in Rochester. My life as a doctor was different, long hours, little personal time. It took its toll on our marriage. Dave Walters went through the same thing, left his cheating wife, remarried a wonderful woman from Germany. He's living proof there's life after infidelity. Mel and I were married for 4 years. A few weeks ago, she had a baby. A biracial baby. A baby that was definitely not mine. The truth hit me like a freight train, right there in the delivery room. I was holding Mel's hand, ready to cut the umbilical cord. When the baby was born, the doctor's shocked expression said it all. I was stunned, the reality sinking in as they handed the baby to Mel. I walked out of that room and never spoke to her again. Her parents tried to smooth things over, leaving messages, pleading for me to reconsider. Her mother even asked if I could forgive Mel and be a father to the baby. Could you? I'd asked her. She had no answer. That was the last time I spoke to any of them. Getting pregnant by another man isn't something you just apologize for and expect everyone to move on. As I left the hospital, I made sure the birth certificate listed the father as unknown. I signed it and walked away. Back at the house, I packed a bag, some clothes, my iPad, a few medical textbooks, tossed it into my Subaru Outback, and left. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen table. No note, no explanation. I checked into a hotel near the hospital where I worked, a different one from where Mel had given birth. The next day, my first full day in Ballymore, I found myself at the pub, drowning my sorrows and venting to anyone who'd listen. I met a few locals that night. First, Mrs. Murphy, the sergeant's wife, showed up at the boarding house to thank me for saving her husband. She called him useless, but that's another story. She offered to help me in any way she could, and I told her I'd check on the sergeant at the hospital in a day or two. Next, the mayor of Ballymore arrived with a couple of town officials. They were all very interested in meeting the American doctor who'd saved the day. Mayor Quinn, a rather imposing woman in her late 50s, was a natural politician. We took a few photos for the local paper, and she asked what brought me to this quiet corner of Ireland. I told her about my family's history roots, tracing back to the potato famine, how my great-grandfather had eventually settled in Rochester. I mentioned that this was my first trip to Ireland and that I'd planned to explore the wild Atlantic Way and Kenmare. The mayor then inquired about my profession. I explained that I was an orthopedic surgeon, specializing in bone and joint repair, with some general surgery experience. Margaret and Sean, the boarding house owners, nodded along as if suddenly well-versed in the intricacies of surgery. The mayor's next question caught me off guard. "And will you be returning to your work in Rochester soon, Dr. Miller?" "I've actually left the hospital. I'm taking a break here in Ireland." Concerned glances were exchanged. The policewoman who'd helped with the sergeant, Erin, was there too. I praised her efforts, saying she'd have done just fine without me. She blushed, and everyone laughed. Then, Mayor Quinn asked to speak with me privately in her office about an important matter. I had no idea what she wanted to discuss, but I agreed to meet with her the next morning. After they left, I felt a bit puzzled by the whole situation. Ireland was a world away from America. The landscape was breathtakingly green, even in spring. I'd spent the past few weeks exploring sleepy towns, enjoying the friendly locals, the hearty food, and the cold beer. Guinness, they said, was practically the national beverage. I spent the rest of the day relaxing at the boarding house. I desperately needed sleep after the eventful night and the mayoral visit. I took a walk after lunch, enjoying the fresh air and the slower pace of life. That evening, I limited myself to just 1 pint of Guinness with dinner. The next morning, I got up early, ate breakfast, and headed to the mayor's office. The secretary greeted me like she'd been expecting me. "You must be the American doctor." I nodded. "The mayor will be here shortly. Please have a seat." I sat down, waiting, and thought about my plans for the day. "Dr. Miller? The mayor is here. Come in." "Thank you." I entered, greeted Mayor Quinn, and took a seat on the couch. Coffee was ordered, and after some small talk, she asked, "Did you have a good evening, Dr. Miller?" "Yes, it was quiet. I had dinner at the pub and apologized to the owner for my behavior on Saturday. I was going through some things and may have had a bit too much to drink. He was very kind, even bought me dinner and a beer as thanks for helping Sergeant Murphy." The mayor nodded. "I'll be leaving later today, if that's what you wanted to discuss." Oh, that's not why I asked you here at all. She seemed surprised. Then what did you want to discuss? Dr. Miller, I have a problem, and I need your help. What could I possibly help you with in Ballymore? I was officially confused. Well, Dr. Miller, you're a doctor without a current contract, and Ballymore is a town in desperate need of a doctor. At least temporarily, until the government in Dublin sends a replacement for Dr. Kennedy, who retired and moved to South Africa. Are you asking me to be the local doctor? I asked, unsure if I'd heard correctly. Yes, that's the proposal. We're in dire need of a doctor. The nearest one is almost an hour away in Dingle. We have a lot of good people here who'd be grateful if you could help us out for a few weeks. The Department of Health says they'll send someone, but it could take some time. I'm not sure I'm the right fit. I'm a surgeon. It sounds like you need a family doctor. Dr. Miller, right now we need any doctor we can get. You're exactly who we need. She insisted. I'm not sure. I hesitated. Please, think about it. But don't take too long, Dr. Miller. We really need you. I spent hours on the phone with the officials in Dublin responsible for assigning doctors. They informed me it could be a year or more before Ballymore saw another doctor. Dr. Kennedy, who was pushing 80 and struggling with memory issues, had moved to South Africa to live with his daughter and her husband, probably not far from a nursing home. It was clear that Ballymore was in a tough spot. So, I started looking into this American doctor who'd practically fallen into our lap. It's impressive what the Garda can dig up when they're motivated. In just one night, they'd compiled a quick dossier on Dr. Miller. Graduated in the top third of his class from a New York medical school, board-certified surgeon. I also learned a bit about his personal life, about how terribly his wife had treated him. Explained a lot about that night at the pub. Now, I just needed to figure out an incentive to convince him to stay on for a few months. I had a plan forming in my mind. I'd already secured urgent permission from the Department of Health for Dr. Ethan Miller to practice medicine in Ireland. I spotted Dr. Miller leaving the mayor's office and headed towards him. I was off duty, so thankfully not in uniform. I was wearing my best casual outfit, a white blouse, skinny jeans, and my favorite heeled boots. My hair was done, makeup on. I wanted to look my best. At 27, I was in great shape, thanks to a healthy dose of running, about 5'8", and I knew how to make a good first impression. Dr. Miller? I called out. He turned, and I walked over, extending my hand. Good morning, Dr. Miller. It's nice to see you again. We haven't officially met. I'm Aaron O'Connell, the constable who assisted you with Sergeant Murphy. Whoa, police uniforms really were good camouflage. I never would have recognized her if she hadn't introduced herself. Our first encounter at the station had been, well, let's just say chaotic was an understatement. And when I'd seen her briefly at the boarding house, she'd been in uniform. Plus, I'd still been half in the bag. But right now, she was gorgeous. Shoulder-length red hair, a beautiful face, an amazing figure. I must have been seriously out of it not to notice before. Dr. Miller? She called again. I turned back, realizing I'd been staring. She approached me. Good morning, Dr. Miller. It's nice to meet you, finally. She offered her hand. I'm Aaron O'Connell, the constable who was helping when you saved Sergeant Murphy's life. My brain struggled to form a coherent response. Right, yes. Well, I haven't quite decided on my plans for the day yet. I might visit Sergeant Murphy at the hospital and then, maybe drive the Wild Atlantic Way. Smooth, Miller. She smiled. I'm actually headed to Dingle to see Jerry now. Would you like to come with me? How could I resist? I don't want to impose. Don't worry, I'd be happy to have company. We walked to her car, a sensible VW Golf. Driving on the left side of the road still felt strange, although less so on a motorcycle. The 45-minute drive to Dingle flew by. I was too busy talking to Erin to notice the time. I learned she'd grown up in Ballymore, her father was a barrister, and she still lived in town in a small apartment. She was 27, single, and planned to go to law school. She'd even been engaged once, to a semi-pro footballer who'd left for Spain, ending both their relationship and his football career, according to Aaron. We visited Sergeant Murphy briefly. He'd heard from his wife and everyone else that I'd saved his life, and he was swearing off fried food, beer, and promising to take up running. Aaron later told me an inspector had warned Jerry he'd be forced into early retirement if he didn't shape up, so his wife was already on his case about exercise. Dingle wasn't huge, but with 2 hospitals, it was the place to be for medical care in the area. A bustling town of about 25,000 on the Dingle Peninsula. Dublin was a good 3 hours east, and Kenmare and Limerick were about an hour south. I offered to buy lunch in exchange for a walking tour, and Erin readily agreed. She knew Dingle well, as her father often worked at the courthouse there. Turned out, she'd studied political science at Trinity College in Dublin, focusing on EU defence policy and international relations. Not your typical small-town policewoman. At lunch, I braced myself for the usual questions. What's an American doing in Ireland on a motorcycle? Where'd you grow up? What about your family? We chatted easily, though. To my surprise, neither of us brought up my wife or my drunken confessions at the pub the other night. I had a great day with Erin, so great that I never made it to the Wild Atlantic Way. Back in Ballymore, she dropped me at the guest house. I thanked her for the ride and the tour, and as I watched her drive away, I knew I'd be seeing Constable Erin O'Connell again. And I was already looking forward to it. 2 days later, I finally took that trip around the Wild Atlantic Way. I woke early, grabbed a quick bite, and set off on my bike. The countryside was absolutely breathtaking. I rode to Cork, then to Kenmare, stopping for gas and a much-needed coffee, accompanied by some delicious pastries. Sean, from the guest house, had advised me to drive clockwise to avoid getting stuck behind tour buses, and I was glad I'd listened. The day was incredible, filled with scenic stops and winding roads. I focused on the present moment, on the beauty of the Irish landscape, pushing everything else out of my mind. Of course, no day trip in Ireland is complete without a little rain. And as I made my way back, the skies opened, unleashing a torrential downpour. I pulled over under a large tree to wait it out, sipping on a soda. That's when I heard it, a loud, sickening crash in the distance. A plume of smoke was rising from a wrecked car a few hundred yards away. I instantly tossed my soda bottle into the ditch, put on my helmet, and rode toward the crash. A minibus and a passenger car had collided head-on. The car was badly damaged, smoke billowing from the engine. I knew I had to get those people out before a fire started. The driver's side door was jammed, but the impact had sprung the back door open. I climbed inside. A man was slumped behind the wheel, bleeding heavily, while an unconscious woman lay in the passenger seat. I quickly checked their pulses. They were both alive. "Call 999. I yelled to the growing crowd. "Tell them to send 4 ambulances, quickly." A man grabbed a fire extinguisher from the minibus and ran to help, aiming the foam at the smoke. I assessed the situation inside the minibus. The driver was conscious but had cuts and lacerations from shattered glass. The elderly passengers were shaken but seemed mostly unharmed. One woman appeared to have a broken collarbone from the seatbelt but was more concerned about her brother-in-law, who had a history of cancer. Despite the chaos, they were all talking, which was a good sign. Back at the wrecked car, people had brought blankets to keep the injured warm. The driver had a compound fracture in his leg, the bone protruding at a gruesome angle. I applied a tourniquet to control the bleeding. With the help of some bystanders, we carefully extracted the man and woman from the car and laid them on the ground, as far from the wreckage as possible. It felt like an eternity waiting for the ambulances, delayed because they had to come all the way from Dingle. I found a first aid kit in the minibus and used it to bandage the driver's wounds. His name was Fergus, a retired accountant who drove part-time. Finally, the ambulances arrived, sirens wailing. The paramedics took over, and I accompanied them to the hospital, providing any information they needed. At the hospital, one of the paramedics recognized me. "You're the American doctor who saved the policeman back in Ballymore, aren't you?" After checking on the accident victims and speaking with the emergency room doctor, I headed back to Ballymore. By the time I reached the guest house, it was dark. Sean and Margaret greeted me at the door. "Oh, there you are, Dr. Miller." "Hi, Sean." "Hi, Margaret." "Yes, well, you're back a bit later than planned, I see." chuckled Sean. Yeah, long story. I could really use some dinner. Hopefully, there's a place around here that serves something that's not deep fried. Actually, there's a lovely Italian place about a kilometer from here, near the market. But, just so you know, some reporters from Kenmare were here looking for you a few minutes ago. Reporters? What did they want? I frowned. They heard you were in an accident. Margaret explained. No, I just stopped to help at a car accident. That's all. I clarified. Sean, who'd been listening intently, suddenly spoke up, his eyes wide. Well, they seem to think you saved 7 people's lives practically single-handedly. I just gave them some first aid. They're all at the hospital in Dingle now, but they'll be fine. Sean pointed to the door. Well, they're waiting for you at the pub. Want to interview you, they do. He grabbed his hat and dashed out. Margaret looked at me, shaking her head. Told them he'd bring them back when you got here. She added, a hint of amusement in her voice. They're eager to talk to you. Great. I sighed. All I wanted was a hot meal, a glass of wine, a long shower, and a solid 8 hours of sleep. I'm heading to the pub then. I smiled at Margaret and headed out the door. Of course, I wasn't going anywhere near the pub. I walked in the opposite direction, toward the Italian restaurant, hoping to grab some food before the reporters caught up with me. I was partially successful. I'd just gotten my meal when Sean found me, reporters in tow. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Mark needed to reach his client, Ethan. He knew Ethan was somewhere in Ireland. His cell number started with +353. Mark had news to share and needed to know his client's next move. He decided to call. Ethan, where are you? Ireland, man. Where exactly? A small town on the southwest coast. Ballymore. Mark got straight to the point. Look, I've got news. And it's not what you want to hear. Melissa is being difficult about the divorce. She's refusing to cooperate. Says if you just come home and meet the baby, you'll get over it, and everything will be fine. She can forget it. She needs to find someone else to be that kid's father. It's not going to be me. Yeah, well, about that. I had my investigator check out the baby's father. It's the gym teacher, the soccer coach, at the high school where Melissa teaches. I don't care who he is. Ethan, you need to hear this. The guy, Kevin, he's married. With 2 kids. He's in no position to support Melissa or her child. What does this have to do with me? I'm not going back to play the clueless husband and father. She made her choices. Ethan's frustration was evident. Mark sighed. He hated delivering bad news. She wants child support, Ethan. Is she serious? Dead serious. What are the chances I'll actually have to pay? It's uncertain. Paternity shouldn't be an issue, but courts often presume a child born during a marriage is the husband's. Unless what? Unless you get your parental rights terminated. Ethan didn't hesitate. Do it. Go to court, get my rights terminated. I filled out the birth certificate as father unknown, make sure that hasn't changed. I will. Don't worry about it, Ethan. I don't recommend you come home right now. It could give her lawyer a chance to drag you into court and push for some kind of payment. Don't worry, I'm staying put for now. Ireland is beautiful, Mark. You should take a vacation, have a Guinness, enjoy the scenery. Mark smiled at the thought but shook his head. Thanks, but my clients need me too much. Maybe next year. Take care, Mark. Ethan hung up, shaking his head. Stupid woman. I think I'll just dance to her tune. Not going to happen. She made her choices, now she can live with them. I refuse to stay married to someone who disrespected me so much, who got pregnant by another man, and expects me to be okay with it. No way. Back in Ballymore, Mayor Quinn showed up at the restaurant a few minutes later. There he is. Didn't have to wait long, she said, beaming at Ethan. You're a real hero, Dr. Miller. Oh? How so? He looked up from his plate, clearly not thrilled to see her. That car accident? You saved 7 people. Don't be so modest. It's all over the news this morning. It wasn't that bad. 3 of them got out on their own. One has a broken collarbone, and another has some cuts. The passengers in the car were hurt the worst, but they'll be fine. No one was, well, no one died, and that's what matters. I need some coffee and I'm going to do some more exploring. I'll think about your offer. You said you talked to Dublin? Yes. They're willing to give you a 1-year temporary license to practice. We need you here, doctor. Please, stay and help us. She sounded almost desperate. I'll explore the area some more and let you know when I get back. How's that? Fair enough. But please, Dr. Miller, think about the impact you could have here. We're just a small town, but we're good people, and we need you. I nodded. I'll think about it. I left the restaurant, needing to clear my head. Writing was the best way to do that. My problems back in Rochester, Mel's betrayal. It all made staying here, at least for a while, tempting. 6 months, maybe? Give Dublin time to find a permanent doctor. I'd see how it went. I hopped on my motorcycle and rode towards Kenmare, looking for a quiet place to eat and think. After talking to Mark, I was even more certain that returning to Melissa wasn't an option. Every day I stayed away was another day she could think about what she'd done, if she even cared. One thing was for sure, though, I wasn't going back to her. Not like this. Lunch was good, the ride back to Ballymore even better. The Irish countryside never failed to amaze me. I was halfway back when my phone started buzzing in my pocket. I pulled over to check it. A text from Mark. Sending you a link to a TV news article. You're a hero. And a voicemail. Dude. You saved lives over in Ireland. You're all over the news. I'll send you the video. Call me later. There was also a missed call and a voicemail from Aaron. Ethan, I know you're out riding, but call me when you get this. Back in Ballymore, I went straight to my room at the guest house. Margaret offered to make tea, but I declined. I needed a shower and a change of clothes. Then, I headed straight for the mayor's office, asking for a meeting. The secretary smiled as she called the mayor's office. So, Dr. Miller, have you decided? She asked, practically vibrating with nervous energy. I've decided to stay in Ballymore and help with the doctor shortage. She practically crushed me in a hug. Oh, Ethan, you won't regret this. Not so fast, Mayor. There are conditions. Her expression faltered slightly as she realized she wasn't dealing with a pushover. And what would those be? She asked carefully. Nothing too big. I held up my hand, listing my conditions. She nodded along, jotting down notes. When I finished, I asked. So, do you still want me? Oh, yes. Everything on this list is doable. Most of it's already in place. You just need to start practicing. Word that Ethan Miller had agreed to stay on as the district doctor spread through Ballymore faster than a bad pint of Guinness. Within a day, there was a line of patients waiting to see him at Dr. Kennedy's old office. The patient records were still there, but the building had been locked up tight since the nurse retired. Mayor Quinn had hired a young secretary for Ethan, a recent high school graduate, eager for her first real job. And Fiona Byrne, the traveling nurse practitioner who used to visit Ballymore half a day a week, would now be able to come more often with Ethan around to handle things. Fiona was in her mid-30s, divorced with a 4-year-old daughter. Her ex-husband, a shipping manager in Dublin, had a wandering eye, a fact that had ultimately led to their split. Fiona had moved to Kenmare for work and lived just outside Ballymore now. She was tall, attractive, blonde, and, if I was being honest with myself, a bit more womanly than me. I'd have to keep an eye on her. Oh my God, this office smells musty. It needs a good airing out, and a serious cleaning. If I find any dead bugs or mouse droppings, well, I'll just clean it up myself, I guess. Sierra, the new administrator, wrinkled her nose at the stale air. She'd just graduated, and this was her first real job. She still had braces. Her mother, clearly proud as punch, had dropped by with her lunch. She was dressed to the nines, probably in her early 40s, and eager to make a good impression. My first task was getting the office in order. I made an inventory list, arranged for deliveries, and logged into the Department of Health system. Then, it hit me. I didn't even have a stethoscope or the authorization to write prescriptions yet. It would take a few days to get everything sorted out, but judging by the line outside, the good people of Ballymore weren't big on waiting. That's when it happened. Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller. Sierra called from the front. What is it? You need to come out here. Now. Why? What's going on? Just hurry. Sierra, what is it? I called back. You need to come out here. Now. Why? What's going on? Just come quickly. I hurried to the waiting area. A man sat there, his arm wrapped in a blood-soaked towel, his face pale. A woman stood beside him, looking distraught. She thrust a plastic bag at me. Through the clear plastic, I could see what looked like a severed finger. He cut his finger off in the tractor engine, the woman said, her voice trembling with panic. This was my first real patient in Ireland. I guided them to the exam room. Sierra, call the hospital in Dingle. Tell them we need to arrange for a reattachment, and we need an ambulance. Now. With only basic supplies on hand, I did what I could to stabilize the man's wound and prepare him for transport. His pinky and ring finger were missing. The ring finger was in the bag, nestled on some ice. An hour later, the ambulance arrived, and the patient was on his way to the hospital. I'd managed to stabilize him, but it had been a close call, especially with such limited resources. Later that afternoon, Fiona, the regional nurse practitioner, dropped by. She was on her way to see another patient and didn't stay long, but she handed me her business card. Sierra mentioned she was a single mom, living just outside of town. I made a mental note of that. For future reference. I also realized I needed to find a place to live. The boarding house wasn't bad, but I wanted my own space. The boarding house wasn't bad, but I wanted my own space. A small, furnished one-bedroom with a decent kitchen and a place to park my motorcycle would be perfect. I contacted a real estate agent, Bridget O'Malley. News travels fast in small towns, and within an hour, she'd found the perfect place, a cozy 500-square-foot apartment. We have shops in town that can get you anything else you need, she'd said with a welcoming smile. Later that day, I thanked Margaret and Sean and moved my meager belongings to my new apartment. I set up my bedding, stocked the fridge, and even bought a bottle of wine, though I wasn't much of a wine drinker. Just as I was settling in, there was a knock at the door. Bridget pulled into the station lot. Everything's ready. Here's the address. She handed me a card with the address of Ethan's new apartment. I tucked it into my pocket and headed home to freshen up after my shift. A quick shower to wash away the day, then I changed into tight jeans, a sleeveless blouse, and put on a touch of eye makeup. I called the Chinese takeaway, ordered some food, picked it up, and drove to the address Bridget had given me. I rang the bell. After a couple of minutes, I heard Ethan's voice. Hello? Who is it? I laughed. Police. Open up. What the? I heard the door unlock, so I let myself in and headed up the stairs. Heard there might have been a break-in, so I thought I'd check, I said playfully. He grinned. Do you always bring food for trespassers? Only the cute ones. I woke up in someone else's bed, and it wasn't alone. I checked the time on my phone. Time to get moving. I nudged Ethan gently. I have to go. What time is it? He mumbled sleepily. 6:39. I need to get cleaned up and head to work. I went to the bathroom, and a moment later, Ethan joined me in the shower. That's where it all began. Why can't people see the obvious? Because they don't want to see it. Melissa refuses to accept that Ethan is done with her. Her affair with that teacher, the soccer coach, it ended their marriage, especially after she had his baby. Is that so hard to understand? But she still won't admit it's over. I filed the divorce papers weeks ago, sent copies to her, advised her to have her attorney review them so we could finalize the details. It's a simple, open and shut divorce, but she's determined to drag it out, which will only cost her more in legal fees. Ethan leaving the country shows his intent, and the New York Supreme Court has a hearing scheduled for next week. I have DNA evidence and photos to prove the child isn't Ethan's, and I'm seeking a court order to compel the real father to provide a DNA sample. That should put a stop to any child support claims against Ethan, at least for now. Melissa actually suggested marriage counseling. As if. It requires both parties to consent, and Ethan wants nothing to do with it. She demanded his location and contact information, which, of course, I refused to provide, citing attorney-client privilege. Her lawyer threatened to take me to court, but that's a bluff. She even showed up at my office with the baby, convinced Ethan would melt into a puddle of paternal goo at the sight of his daughter. The baby was cute, like any other toddler, but she looked nothing like Ethan. I'm considering having the baby brought to court so the judge can see for themselves. Melissa's real motive is money, plain and simple. The child's father, Kevin, has a wife and kids of his own. He's not wealthy. They live on a teacher's salary and his wife's income as a business manager at a small car dealership. They're barely getting by with their mortgage and bills. Melissa wants Ethan's income, but she's not going to get it. He's walked away from it all. She just hasn't realized it yet. She still has the house, the car, and everything in it. She could sell it all, move into a smaller place, start over. If she wanted to. The house is actually in foreclosure, but Ethan signed away his rights to it. When it's sold, there should be enough for a decent down payment on a modest condo. That's all Melissa cares about, the money. Fiona Byrne was deep in thought, planning her visit to the new American doctor, Ethan Miller. Mayor Quinn had managed to persuade him to stay on and replace Dr. Kennedy, who'd finally retired after one too many serious mistakes that had, unfortunately, harmed patients. Everyone was relieved to see him go. Fiona had met Ethan briefly. He was attractive, and not just a regular GP, he was a surgeon. Word about him had spread like wildfire, especially the gossip about his dramatic split with his soon-to-be ex-wife. Mayor Quinn had even ordered a background check, just to be sure, and the medical board in Dublin had confirmed his credentials. The unmarried women in the area were practically lining up to see him, often with minor ailments that were conveniently required examinations. Despite her hectic schedule with work and Saoirse, Fiona was determined to make time for a visit to Ethan's office. She'd use the pretext of discussing patient care challenges. It would give her a chance to be alone with him, and she planned to dress for the occasion. She was driving to her next patient when her phone rang. She answered through the car's Bluetooth system. Hello? Hi, is this Fiona Byrne? A male voice asked. Yes, it is. Who's calling? Good morning. It's Ethan Miller, the temporary physician in Ballymore. Dr. Miller, how can I help you? Fiona replied, her mind already racing with possibilities. I was hoping we could meet sometime to discuss the local healthcare needs. I'm only here for a few months, until they find a permanent doctor, but I'm a bit concerned about, well, I'm not sure how things are usually done here. I could use some guidance. Sure, that would be great. When's a good time for you? Whenever you're available. I'll make time. This is important to me. Fiona paused, thinking. I'm actually driving right now, but I'll call you later and we can arrange a time that works for both of us. Sounds good? That sounds perfect. I really appreciate your help, Fiona. As the call ended, Fiona started formulating a plan. It might take some time to see it through, but she was a patient woman. And who knew, maybe Ethan Miller had something in mind too. Time would tell. My secretary, bless her heart, is completely overwhelmed with calls from people wanting to see me. They even wait outside the office when I arrive in the morning. Most of the patients are women, and I'm starting to think they might be more comfortable with a female doctor. Fiona Byrne, the nurse practitioner Fiona might be a better fit for many of them, especially for routine checkups. I'll give her a call and see if we can work together more effectively. 2 days later, Fiona invited me over to her house for dinner. I couldn't turn down a home-cooked meal, so I walked over, bringing a bottle of red and a bottle of white, not sure what her preference was. When I knocked, a little girl, maybe 3 or 4, answered the door. She looked at me with a mix of curiosity and surprise. Then, she turned and yelled, "Mommy! The American is here!" Fiona greeted me warmly at the door, her daughter standing shyly beside her. Fiona was stunning. She was about my height, with long dark hair and a slender figure. I just stood there for a moment, momentarily speechless, until I remembered the wine. Hello, I'm Ethan, and who are you? I asked the little girl. Her face brightened. My name is Saoirse. I'm 4, and my favorite book is Winnie the Pooh. Nice to meet you, Saoirse. Tigger's my favorite. I handed the wine to Fiona. Mrs. Billings knows her wine, Fiona said with a smile. Could you open the white and pour us a glass? Unless you prefer a beer? Wine's fine. I opened the bottle, Saoirse watching my every move with wide, curious eyes. Are you having some wine too, Saoirse? I asked jokingly. Fiona laughed. No, silly. Kids drink juice. I'll have orange juice, please, Mommy. Fiona prepared dinner, chatting and smiling all the while. I offered to help, but she shooed me away. Instead, Saoirse insisted I help her color a picture of farm animals. When I tried to color a pig red, she corrected me firmly. Pigs are beige, not red. Dinner was a delicious beef stew, followed by freshly baked cookies. We drank more wine, talking and laughing. Later, Saoirse was sent off to put on her pajamas and brush her teeth. She returned a few minutes later, clutching her Winnie the Pooh book. Ethan is going to read me a bedtime story, Mommy. Fiona nodded. Saoirse brought her book over, and I read to her in the living room while Fiona tidied up the kitchen. Watching them, I thought, this is what a real family feels like. This is real life. Ethan was smitten with Saoirse. She might be small, but she could charm the birds out of the trees. Pity she couldn't work her magic on her own father. I don't usually invite men into my home, let alone share dinner with them and my daughter, but this time felt different. I already knew quite a bit about Ethan. The grapevine in a small town is very efficient, and I liked what I'd seen of him since he arrived. He'd been betrayed by his wife, and that made him relatable. He understood the pain I'd felt. I'd packed up Saoirse and left her father in Dublin. I couldn't tolerate his disrespect any longer. He didn't want a daughter, didn't want the responsibility of a family. His loss. I knew I wasn't the only woman interested in Ethan. There was Erin Kelly, younger, prettier, and very good with men. But I had an advantage. I knew what Dr. Ethan Miller was looking for. And the way he looked at Saoirse as he read to her, it said it all. Dinner with Ethan was lovely. I returned to my apartment around midnight, showered, and went to bed. If the past few days were any indication, tomorrow would be another busy one. Just as I was drifting off, my phone rang. It was a U.S. number, marked as unknown. I almost ignored it, but I worried it might be my parents, so I answered. Hello? Ethan, is that you? Melissa's voice was instantly recognizable. I immediately regretted picking it up. Melissa, if you have something to say, go through Mark. I don't want to talk to you. My tone was firm. Ethan, please don't hang up. Let me explain. Melissa, there's nothing left to discuss. You've said it all. Goodbye. I hung up and blocked her number without hesitation. So, I've heard I have competition for Dr. Miller's attention. Nurse Hottie is apparently in the running. She is attractive, I'll give her that, and charming, too. But I have the advantage. I'm not carrying any baggage from a previous marriage, no kids to complicate things. Still, I need to up my game. Plan my next move. That woman is becoming a real pain. Ethan doesn't pay me enough to deal with her constant harassment. I've told her repeatedly that he won't speak to her, but she just keeps pushing. What gets me is that she cheated on him, got pregnant with another man's child, and expects him to just ignore it all and come crawling back to her? She's delusional. Ethan just texted me. She somehow got his Irish number and called him. He wants me to file for a restraining order, but it's tough to get one without a threat of physical violence. I'm trying to convince a judge, but I've warned Ethan not to get his hopes up. A few weeks had passed since I'd met Ethan, and he'd already been to my house for dinner 3 times. On Saturday, he took Saoirse and me for a walk and picnic at Killarney National Park. We had a wonderful time. We walked along the trails, Saoirse riding on Ethan's shoulders for a bit. We had lunch at the Ladies' View Cafe and then went to Torque Waterfall, where we took pictures for him to send to his parents. That night, after Saoirse was sound asleep, we made love. It was the first time I'd been with anyone since my divorce, and I was nervous. But it felt right. We spent the night together, waking up in each other's arms. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Mark, with an update on my divorce. It's not going well. Melissa still doesn't seem to grasp that you have zero interest in reconciling, especially after she had a child with another man.
Mark, what the hell is going on?
He hesitated. I wish I knew. I've been trying to get her to sign the papers and finalize everything, but no luck.
So, what now? What are our options?
I think we need to move to Plan B.
And what's Plan B?
I'm going back to court, but this time I'm filing for a different reason. I'll explain the situation with the child to the judge and see if that moves things along.
We could file for something else,
Mark added.
But it doesn't make much sense since you're the one who left.
It should only take a year in New York, but a judge might see it differently because you left.
What about Plan A? Irreconcilable differences? Isn't that the right approach?
That's what I thought, Mark replied. But the judge brought up the idea of you coming home and doing counseling. I told her you had a job in another country, and she asked when you were returning to the US.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Just get me a divorce, Mark. I don't care how, just do it.
Are you coming back?
Mark asked, concerned in his voice.
Not while I'm still married to her.
I heard him mutter something that sounded a lot like, crap.
Mark, make it happen, okay?
I'm working on it, Ethan. I called Ethan's mother to try and find out where he was. She let it slip that he was in Ireland. Now I just need to find him, go there, and fix things. I know I can work it out if I can just talk to him. We were married for 4 years before I started seeing Kevin. I admit it was a mistake, but Ethan was always at the hospital. I felt single. We'd talked about starting a family, and when I told him I was pregnant, he was thrilled. He helped paint the nursery, brought home new things all the time, even a baseball glove. Said he'd teach our child, boy or girl, how to play. Ethan will realize he made a mistake leaving us. He'll love the baby when he holds her, I know it. Lately, though, Kevin has been avoiding me. He doesn't answer my calls, and when I went to the school, he practically ran away when he saw me. I wonder if his wife knows about us. That would explain it. I need to find out exactly where Ethan is in Ireland. Then, I'll book a flight and go to him. The hospital in Dingle called, asking for my help with a backlog of surgeries. Their orthopedic surgeon was out, battling cancer, and the surgeries had been piling up for a month. I agreed to come in for 4 days to help them catch up. I was just getting ready to leave for Dingle on my motorcycle when I got another call. Emergency. A young man had been in a motorcycle accident, hit a car at high speed. He was in bad shape. If a surgeon didn't operate soon, he might lose both arms. Just as I was about to head out, Constable Aaron O'Connell arrived in a Garda car. The hospital called. We need to get you to Dingle, quickly. No helicopter available. I jumped in the car, and we sped off, the siren wailing. She covered the 27 kilometers in record time. Go save a life, Doc. She gave me a quick nod as I jumped out of the car. I rushed into the examined the young man, and started prepping for surgery. He was only 18. I spent 11 hours reattaching his arms, while the neurosurgeon dealt with his head injuries and a plastic surgeon worked on his face. When it was finally over, I was exhausted. I needed the bathroom, food, and sleep, in that order. It had been the most stressful day since I'd found out about Mel's affair. I met with the scheduling nurse and reviewed the plan for the next few days. 8 surgeries, 2 per day. It was going to be tough, especially since I hadn't performed surgery in over a month. But I was determined to push through. The Irish people had been good to me, and I owed them this. The nurse mentioned they'd need my help every 2 weeks to keep up with the backlog, and I agreed. After wrapping things up, I realized I had no way back to Ballymore. So, I called Erin. Half an hour later, she arrived in a Garda car, her red hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked beautiful. I couldn't help but wonder, what should I do about this? 4 months later, I was finishing up with my last patient of the day. I sent Sierra home and began tidying up the office. Suddenly, the door opened. We're closed. I called out, surprised. Hi, Ethan. I looked up, startled to see Melissa standing there. Melissa, how did you find me? Disbelief edged my voice. It took some doing, but I did. You look good. Her eyes swept over me. I sat down, trying to mask my unease. Thanks. What do you want, Melissa? She looked different somehow. Motherhood had softened her features. I want you to come home. Her voice was a mix of hope and desperation. Anger surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I took a deep breath. Why do you think I just ignore what you did? Ignore the consequences of your affair? The child you had with another man? I'm not going to pretend everything's okay. You can't just have your fun and expect everyone to forget about the fallout. I'm not the type to accept you having another man's baby. Melissa's gaze fell to the floor. Ethan, you need to come home. I need you. We need you. You and your daughter. My patience snapped. Seriously? I don't have a daughter. You and Kevin have a daughter. Let him handle it. Go home, Melissa. But we were married for 4 years, and I love you. You know you love me too. Come back to us. Her voice wavered. If you really loved me, why were you with him? Explain that. My anger was a simmering pot, threatening to boil over. You were never around. I was lonely. Kevin was there. We talked a lot. Her voice was small, barely audible. Oh, so you were just fine with him being there? When did you forget that we weren't supposed to be having fun with other people? Melissa struggled to find the words. Can you just think about it? I miss you, and I know you'd be a great father. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. Just then, Erin walked in, looking effortlessly gorgeous in tight jeans and a sleeveless blouse. Without hesitation, I walked over to her, kissed her, and wrapped my arms around her. Erin, this is Melissa. She found me here in Ireland. Erin sized Melissa up in a split second, then turned to me. Ethan, we need to leave soon. Dinner with my parents is at 6. Melissa's just leaving. My voice was firm. We've said all we need to. But Melissa wasn't going anywhere. Ethan, we need to talk. Seriously, about what's going on. Her voice trembled. Erin stepped in. Melissa, we really have to go. Ethan and I need to get on the road. My parents are sticklers for punctuality. I'm sure you understand. She fixed Melissa with a steely look that would have stopped a charging bull. If this had been a pub brawl, the crowd would be roaring. I wasn't going to entertain Melissa's pleas. She'd been with another man, and had his child. I sympathized with the child, not with her. She should have thought about the consequences before having her affair. Mark had kept me updated on the court proceedings. The divorce was almost final. Melissa would get the house and our savings, over $90,000 in total. A costly lesson, but I wasn't rushing to replace her. I planned to stay in Ireland for a few more months, work as the local doctor, and then figure out my next steps. Life, however, doesn't always go as planned. Things didn't go as planned. That woman with the red hair, she interrupted everything. Melissa fumed. I'd left the baby with my parents, hoping that seeing what he was missing would make Ethan come back, want to be a family again. I'd worked so hard to lose the baby weight, to fit back into my size 6 jeans. I even brought Ethan's favorite perfume. But then she showed up. I could smell her Chanel perfume a mile away. She better not think I'm giving up without a fight. This hotel room is tiny. Barely room to move between the bed and the desk. The TV is some ancient tube model. How do people live like this? I need to find something to eat and call my mom. She's not thrilled about taking care of the baby, and she's getting a lot of questions from friends. They don't know I adopted the baby. I don't think she's bothering to correct them. What the heck is going on? She actually came to Ireland? How did she find me? One of my big-mouthed relatives must have let it slip. She should have listened to her lawyer. The divorce is almost final. There's no turning back. We're finished. I was so glad to see Erin. She even mentioned meeting my parents, though I'm not sure she was serious. We went out for dinner, and then I brought her back to my place. It's small, but it's mine. I made breakfast for her the next morning. Last night, after dinner with Ethan, I took a walk around the village. It's quaint, I guess, but nothing special. I don't understand what he sees in this place. And they call restaurants pubs here. Apparently, it's short for public house. Who knew? I learned Ethan only works 3 days a week. The locals were very chatty. They seemed to know everything about him. Back at my hotel, run by this sweet older couple, Margaret and Sean, she mentioned that Ethan was a local hero. She figured out who I was pretty quickly and excused herself. I overheard her and Sean talking quietly. Something's up. The next morning, I went to Ethan's clinic. A teenager was at the front desk. She definitely recognized me. Ethan wasn't in. Apparently, it was surgery day at the hospital in Dingle. He was booked solid all week. Looks like I might have to come back next Monday. I spent some time exploring Dingle. The coffee was terrible, and the fog rolled in, making the town feel even smaller. I have no idea where to wait for Ethan, or if he's even staying in town. I'll have to do some digging. I got a call from the Garda. An American woman was asking around for Dr. Miller. She was staying with Margaret and Sean at their guest house. It was obvious this was Mrs. Miller, trying to convince Ethan to return to Rochester. We needed to handle this delicately. Margaret had informed me that Melissa Miller had visited the clinic, but thankfully, Ethan was in Dingle for surgeries today. I had to get Mrs. Miller out of Ballymore, and away from Ethan, as quickly as possible. Luckily, Constable Erin O'Connell, a stunning woman with a knack for persuasion, was on my team. Erin's actually leaving the police force soon to study law at Trinity College in Dublin. She's going to be brilliant. I spoke with Margaret and Sean. It turned out they had to close their B&B temporarily due to a safety violation. Perfect. I told Mrs. Miller she had to leave immediately. Sean packed her things, refunded her money, and booked her a room at the nearest hotel, in Kenmare. She was furious, understandably, but Sean knew this was for the best. For Ballymore, they just kicked me out of the hotel, claiming they had to close because of a health inspector. Now they're sending me to Kenmare, wherever that is, and it's pouring rain. I am officially done with Ireland. Now, I'm stuck in Kenmare, wherever that is, and it's pouring rain. I am so over Ireland. My mom keeps calling, asking when I'm coming home. And to top it all off, I just got an email reminding me my maternity leave ends next week. I have to go back to work. Here's the thing. I wanted Ethan to meet my parents because he's the best guy I've ever been with. He has high standards, and he sticks to them, even with a wife who wasn't faithful, like me. But I'm going to have to break up with him soon. I'm moving to Dublin in August for law school. I need to settle in, prepare for my new life. And besides, I'm not going to be celibate in Dublin. I enjoy sex, and it wouldn't be fair to keep seeing him while I'm with other men. It's complicated, especially knowing he won't be seeing other women. So, yeah, best to end things sooner rather than later. I've been gathering intel from the Ballymore Gossip Network, very efficient, these small towns. Apparently, Erin's been accepted to law school in Dublin, and she's starting in August. Erin's very outgoing, and I know I'm not the right guy for her in the long run. I'd just end up waiting for the day she met someone else, which would inevitably end things for us. For my own sanity, I need to remember this is just a fling, a bit of fun. I'm not going to do anything stupid like tell her I'm in love with her. Besides, there are other people in Ballymore I wouldn't mind getting to know better. That doctor the Department of Health promised hasn't shown up. I didn't hear anything, so I called the hospital in Dingle. They said they'd let me know, but weeks have gone by, and still no word. Ethan and I parted on good terms. We both knew it was just a temporary thing, friends with benefits. It's been a few months since Erin left for Dublin. I've been busy with work and Saoirse, so my social life has been non-existent. I was surprised when Ethan invited us to the fair in Kenmare for the weekend. I figured he was lonely, missing Erin, and wanted some company. And if I'm being honest, I could use a little male attention myself. Saoirse was over the moon. She immediately started packing, even though we weren't leaving until Saturday afternoon. When Saturday arrived, I'd completely forgotten Ethan had a motorcycle. I was expecting him to show up in my car. Instead, he pulled up in an Audi sedan. Turns out, Mayor Quinn had arranged a short-term lease for him, much more comfortable for his weekly trips to Dingle. Saoirse climbed right into the back seat, but I made her get out so I could install her car seat. Safety first. The fair was a blast. Saoirse loved the rides, the cotton candy, all the junk food. She held Ethan's hand the entire time, and he seemed to be enjoying himself, too. After the fair, we had dinner, then drove back to my house. I invited him in, and Saoirse, already in her pajamas, dragged him off to her room to read her a bedtime story. He came back half an hour later. She's out like a light. All that food and fresh air. I handed him a glass of wine. You've earned this. How do you manage everything, Fiona? I don't overthink it, I just do it. I can't even remember life before Saoirse. She's everything. Ethan looked puzzled. How could her father walk away from her? Some men aren't cut out to be fathers. He's one of them. Ethan took a sip of his wine. If she were mine, I wouldn't be able to handle it. Saoirse is my everything. I took a sip of my wine. That doesn't mean I don't want more. What do you want, Fiona? We talked late into the night, about his past, about Melissa's betrayal, about her ridiculous insistence that he was the father of that child. He wished she'd been honest with him, told him she didn't want to stay married. He was divorced now, relishing his newfound freedom, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. He wanted to be certain of his choices this time. Saoirse seemed to be warming up to Ethan, seeing him as a potential father figure. And me? Well, I was definitely warming up to him. Ethan, just wanted to update you. Your divorce has been finalized. I sent you the original decree, and I have a copy on file if you need it. Congratulations, you're officially single, at least in Ireland. Which reminds me, there are legal risks involved with. Mark, I really appreciate it. Just pay my bill when you get it. I was worried when Melissa showed up here. What was she thinking? Ethan shook his head. Her family was furious. Told her to get her act together. She came to give me one last chance, I guess. When I turned her down, she went back home. She's still struggling, being a single mom. What about the baby's father? Mark asked, sounding concerned. Kevin's got his own issues. He's ignoring Melissa. He's afraid she'll ask for child support, which he can't afford. That's ridiculous. Mark scoffed. So, are you coming back soon? Or staying in Ireland? I'm not sure yet. It's different here, but I like it. A lot. And I've met someone, a great woman who could make me very happy. She's a nurse practitioner. I have a 4-year-old daughter. What? Mark exclaimed. Yeah, she's smart, beautiful, and a fantastic mom. The little girl isn't mine, obviously, but she didn't lie to me, didn't deceive me like Melissa did. Melissa betrayed me, lied to me. When I saw that baby, that I wasn't the father, it just hit me hard. That's when I knew it was over, that I had to get out of Rochester. Well, you've definitely achieved that, Mark said with a chuckle. Thanks for everything, Mark. I hung up, feeling a sense of closure. Ethan, it's time, Fiona said, urgency in her voice. Oh, no. I'll grab the bag, just give me a second. I quickly grabbed the pre-packed hospital bag from the closet. I'd called ahead, and they were expecting us. My parents were already at Fiona's house, fussing as usual. Saoirse hugged us both. Bring me home a baby brother, she demanded. I laughed as I helped Fiona into the car. The Garda had arranged for a police escort to the hospital in Dingle. 9 hours later, our baby girl was born. I made a mental note. Maybe next time, Saoirse could have that baby brother. My parents and Saoirse came to the hospital to meet the newest member of the family. Annabelle Marie Miller, oblivious to all the fuss, held onto my finger as I held her in my arms. That's right, I have the final say. I'm a lucky woman. I found a man who's committed to being a family man from day one. Ethan has embraced the responsibilities of being a husband and a father. He's mine, but I'll share him with Saoirse, Annabelle, and likely a few more. I can't understand women who don't recognize a good thing when they have it. Ethan's ex was a fool, and thankfully, her loss is my gain. She messed up, lost a good man. Ethan and I found each other by pure chance, and I'm grateful. I think he is too. We're a family now, and if anyone tries to come between us, well, I'll handle it. This is Ireland, and I don't tolerate other women showing interest in my husband. You hear that, Aaron Kelly? As we conclude this journey, we witness Ethan Miller's transformation from a man broken by betrayal to someone who finds new purpose and love in the heart of Ireland. In the quaint town of Ballymore, Ethan not only saves lives but also rebuilds his own. With a newfound family and a fresh start, Ethan's story reminds us that even in the face of heartbreak, life has a way of leading us to where we truly belong. Thank you for joining us on this emotional ride. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories on our channel. Until next time.